The Books Podcast, presented by Tim Hague.
Welcome to the Books Podcast, coming from a delightful cafe in Peckham, South London. I'm Tim Hague. As you know, we're very proud of the authors we've welcomed to the show, names like Scarlett Thomas, Howard Jacobson, Joanne Harris. Do scroll down, check out the backlist, and please subscribe now on your favourite podcast player and tell your friends. Well, it's lovely to be out and about. We're here in Peckham with all that implies, with the award-winning Anglo-Australian novelist Evie Wyld to discuss her new book, The Echoes.
The harrowing parts of life are the things that make us, I suppose. You have to shield your child from your real self. Nobody's a natural mother. If I find myself baking bread or wearing like a floral dress or something, I think, oh, that's the kind of thing that a dead wife would do, you know.
I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, is this the kind of book you'd like your wives and servants to read?
Evie, thank you for joining us on Books Podcast.
No problem.
We're going to start off talking inevitably about ghosts because the book starts with ghosts. I want to say it's not really a ghost story, although it is really a ghost story, but it's not just a ghost story. But, well, we start off with that great opening sentence, Max is dead, I do not believe in ghosts, which since my death has become something of a problem. Why are we starting with Max already dead?
Well, I started writing it in the first week of the first lockdown, and I think it had something to do with being locked down with my husband and feeling kind of that.
Oh, I can
pressure.
see that. How do you know? It's all falling into place.
It's a good opportunity to murder
because
someone you love.
It's a fairly claustrophobic sense, is that opening of the novel, in which Hannah, his girlfriend, not wife, is alive, bereaved, obviously, and he's observing her. So the mechanics of the ghost story trope become completely important, because how you do a ghost is crucial. Tell me about Max's ghost.
So I wanted to, I love ghost stories, and so I knew I wanted to kind of play with one. But the point of Max really is that he assumes he is the main character, and then you come to find out that actually his girlfriend Hannah is the main character, and he's just another point of view on her.
He's a very important point of view, because he's constantly there, constantly observing her. Later on in the book, he does say, "Oh, now I understand why the ghost is never the lead character in a novel."
Exactly.
Because of course he can't do very much. This I loved the question of his ability to affect anything. It's not perfectly be absent, but it's not under his own control.
Yeah, I wanted that feeling of kind of impotency, that he's discovering stuff about Hannah that he didn't know when he was alive, and his desire would be to talk to her about it and to kind of, discuss it and exact change, but he can't, and he just has to.
And of course he doesn't know how he died.
No, he doesn't.
So he needs to observe, he needs Hannah to, as it were, tell him, but she doesn't really know he's there.
Yeah, she doesn't know he's there, and so his kind of, what he's doing is he's taking from ghost stories that he knows in popular culture. So there's Ghost with Patrick Swayze, there's Ghostbusters, there's Hamlet.
And he's a creative writing teacher, so he's saying, what does a ghost want?
Yeah, exactly.
He asks himself that, as he would ask his students.
And the assumption is, well, if I solve the mystery of my death, then I will ascend or whatever, or all the gates of hell will open.
Absolutely, he has that expectation that there is a sort of an exit strategy.
Yeah. So it was quite useful to use as like something to keep the plot kind of chugging along. It's like you're reaching for this thing. There's a quest, which ultimately, we know as people who have lost people that it's not the death itself which is the problem. It's the aftermath of that thing.
Also, to sort of develop the ghost trope a little bit, he has a heightened awareness. It's not like he's not like a ghost on television where he's a spectral outline. He can perceive thing. I mean, in the U-bend, he knows that his beard shavings are there, and an earring that Hannah lost. He knows where it is. He knows every creature, every critter in the flat. So it's that sort of taking possession of the flat. Is that what haunting means?
I suppose so. I mean, I think it's different. I think people are haunted. I don't believe in an afterlife and ghosts themselves. I think people project a ghost, and I think there's a lot of fun to be had with playing with ghosts in writing. And one of the things I had to do was kind of write a lot of ghosts, sort of inverted commas, superpowers, and have fun with that, and then take them away again. I think in the end, what I was interested in was that he does have these powers of being able to see through walls and kind of understand things on a different level, but it's useless because he can't communicate about it to anyone.
Well, I said that it's not really a ghost story, and there we are. We've done 5 or 10 minutes on it. And I don't mean to be rude about ghost stories at all, but because they're not trivial, but there are much more important themes in the book. It's a much bigger and more dark book than we've been giving it the impression. So we need to talk a little bit about the structure, your chapter structure. What you do is you very formally divide it up into chapters so we can follow through where Evie is going. We start off with first, of course, the chapter is called After his death, and then there's a chapter before where we see Hannah and Max interacting, and then we go back to Australia, which is where Hannah's from, and there's in some ways that's the most vivid cast of characters, her past. So we need to talk about that and how her past has brought her here to, well, Peckham, or where was it?
It's Tulse Hill.
Tulse Hill, yes. Not remotely the same thing. So how has Hannah's past brought her here?
So Hannah is, I suppose, running away from her past.
Everybody in this book is running away from their past.
That's what we're all doing.
We will come back
That's
to
what
that.
life is.
I was going to get you to say that, but yes, please go.
So Hannah feels like she's returning to the place that she should have been all along, because she knows through a photograph that her grandmother was born not far from where she ends up in Tulse Hill. And she's kind of made up a kind of alternative life, a pathway that her family would have gone down had they not left the UK for Australia. And so when she's running away from the events that happened to her and her family in Australia, that's the place that she runs to, because she feels like she'll find some sort of origin there that will make her into the person that she would rather be.
And in fact, the book is, in many ways, it's about the impossibility of feelings, isn't it? The feelings that the family in Australia have are just too big for them to deal with. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. Is that the case? Are families too intense?
Some of them certainly are. I mean, I think it's, all families are different. I think there's a...
Anna Karenina raises her misshapen skull. Yes, all families are different.
I think that what I find interesting is, my books, not just this one, but the ones I wrote before this one, there's often a lot of talk about, the trauma and there she goes again, off on the trauma trail. But I think the events in The Echoes are no more sort of eyebrow raising than what happens in a lot of families. Without wanting to give any spoilers, there's there are the kind of abuses that go on are fairly everyday.
You think they are, because it's quite extreme, some of it. One of the themes is sexual abuse, and almost all of the women in this book, and we go back through generations, are sexually abused and treated shabbily, or in some cases,
most women are
atrociously. I take your point, but what struck me is that none of them seem as indignant and angry as you might expect. They almost accept it as the lot of women.
Well, in a lot of ways, it is. I mean, that's how we have been socialized to respond to it. It's about keeping secrets. It's about not making a fuss and being polite and friendly, because that is the lot of,
not calling out
Yeah.
a man who's abused you.
No, of
and,
course not.
But despite all of, they are, of course, all traumatized. And your technique here is we meet the characters going backwards in time. So we will meet a character who seems to be unkind or uncaring to, say, their children, and then when we find out about their childhood, it's unpacked, and we understand why, and accept it, the way they behave, even though misery is passed on. Not in this case man to man, but woman to woman. Philip Larkin never thought that one, but it is, isn't it? It's handing it down through the generations.
Yeah, and I think that I'm not so much interested in making kind of moral statements in my books, but I am interested in holding a mirror up, and I think that
And exploring them. Yeah, I mean, it's not. It doesn't sort of take a stand. Your book. It just it investigates. And very compassionately, but quite harrowingly in some ways.
Yeah, I think. I mean, the harrowing parts of life are the things that make us, I suppose, and I think, I think the actual moments of dreadful things happening are actually quite few and far between in the book. It's the aftermath, and the kind of, asking the question, can you see this thing as it approaches you, has always interested me.
So as well as being about the impossibility of feelings, it's about the impossibility of motherhood as well. Now, by definition, if every girl has a mother, and yet motherhood is impossible for these women. They cannot be the kind of mother that they want to be.
I think there is often a certain sort of costume change you do as a parent, as a mother. There's a kind of stepping back from your own life, from your own sharpness, to become a mother. You're not allowed to talk about the negatives of having children, which are vast.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real feeling that you need to be quiet, and suddenly you notice this the moment you get pregnant, that suddenly your body is not your own. Despite the fact that, we don't live in America, we live somewhere where we have reproductive rights.
Oh, but even then you go to the hospital and people pull you about.
People pull you about, but also you don't have
directions.
You don't feel that you have autonomy over your own body, because now you are a body for someone else, So I think there is an absolute change of skin you go through as a mother. And then suddenly you have this giant responsibility that, as much as men might be more enlightened nowadays, that does all still fall to the mother for the majority of it.
But Hannah's mother starts off, when she's a girl, she's vibrant, she's spiky, she's clever. She marries this man Piers that she meets. And then it's as though she puts on a mask of being a wife and mother and suppresses.
Yeah, well, you have to shield your child from your real self. Nobody's a natural mother.
But she doesn't reveal it to Piers either, to her husband.
No.
She's put, it's as though she's put her real self in a cupboard.
Yeah.
And is now just playing the part of somebody else.
I think women are often told that their real selves are too much and too dangerous. And I think that is reflected in Kerry.
Piers misses it.
Yeah.
We have a chapter on Piers as well. When we were talking about the structure, what you do is then you go back, and then almost every one of the characters who's looked as though they're a secondary character gets centre stage. So and we see Piers as well. We see why he fell in love with her. And we also see him later regretting that the woman that he fell for has disappeared somehow.
Yeah. I think I wanted to have a look at who gets to tell stories. and there are larger questions in there about
Everybody has their own story in this book.
Yeah.
And that is crucial because, of course, we're all used to, having secondary characters, peripheral characters.
Absolutely. And I think, it's like when you're watching an action movie and there's all these people being murdered in the background. Those people all have
all those
families.
red shirts.
Yeah.
You go, hang on, didn't he have a wife?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you do. I think that too. Now, at risk, I hope this is not too much of a spoiler, but it's absolutely connected with what we're talking about. And it's shown very early in the book. Hannah has an abortion, which again is about, she sees motherhood as an impossibility. It's not for her at this point. She doesn't tell Max. Let's talk a little bit about Max and Hannah's relationship. How do you see that?
I see it as, I think often in fiction, relationships are very black and white. You have baddies and goodies. And I think wrestling with the trickier parts of your partner and the trickier parts of yourself is part of a relationship. And I think in order to be fully present, it's acknowledging that nobody is a perfect version of themselves. I think often in fiction, women, particularly wives, are seen through a rose-tinted glass. And, I very much have this belief that if I find myself baking bread or wearing like a floral dress or something, I think, that's the kind of thing that a dead wife would do.
Well, Kerry, Hannah's mother, bakes constantly, very badly.
Yes.
They have it's called the goat bin, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they keep goats in Australia, and they're always tipping her baking into the goat bin because it's inedible.
Yeah.
But she wasn't always a bad baker.
No, I think the bad baking, it's where she puts her feelings. So, you talked about her putting herself in the closet, her real self, and it's all coming out in the baking. It's like creating something disgusting.
Whereas Hannah, again, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler, self-harms. It's again quite clear towards the beginning of the book, which terrifies Max, as it should do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, again, the pressures that are put on women to not make a fuss, not be impolite, make everyone around them feel comfortable. I think it quite often gets siphoned into this incredible feeling of pressure inside, and self-harm, while it is a really destructive, terrible thing, it can be an expression of what's going on the inside, which is actually in some
all
ways...
traumatized people do find a way of expressing their trauma, even if it's not shouting and hitting back. Max, on the other hand, he could be quite hard to live with. I thought he was a wonderful character. He's cooking. He's always cooking. He's a good cook. And he wants Hannah to learn to cook. Why? Why? Actually, I don't know if this was deliberate, but food waste is kind of a theme of this book. We've got the goat bin. We've got the coffee that she throws away. We've got food that she doesn't want Max to do. Food, was that a willful, sort of deliberate thread you were weaving through, or did it just happen to be?
That's interesting. I've never been asked that before. I think it's to do with feelings towards food. So I think as a woman in her, what am I, mid-40s, growing up in the 90s, I'm kind of very aware of food as an enemy or as something that I, want, and I think...
An enemy?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Growing up in the 90s as a young woman, we had heroin chic, all of the emphasis on being thin and the value that you have.
I remember my big
thin.
sister used to have cardboard and cheese. What was it? Rye biscuits and cheese for lunch.
Yeah.
And I looked at her and thought, it's not worth it, girl.
Yeah. But I think generally women will have some response to a big plate of food, like whether it's a discomfort discomfort with eating in front of people, or it holds a lot of emotion, especially for women, I think, and especially women from my generation. And I think it's also about creation. It's about making something, and the horrible cakes that Kerry makes. No one's ever going to eat those. So that is this sort of wasteful thing that goes into the goats, and then the goats produce the milk, and the milk produces the cheese, and it's kind of like this cycle of where it all goes and where the badness gets drawn out of the food.
And her
suppose.
husband pretends to like barbecuing to try and discourage her from cooking.
Yeah, but I think the sort of multiple cups of coffee that Hannah makes is like a coping strategy that she does it, and it's about creating something, making something, doing something with your hands. And I think that is one of a number of coping strategies she had, and some of them end, if the coffee making doesn't work and the kind of tugging on her earrings doesn't work, then quite quickly we get to self-harm. But she has this kind of, these things set up in order to try and take her off the path of a certain feeling.
The Australian passages are evoked extremely vividly. You've clearly lived in Australia.
My mother's Australian, so we're half.
So you're half Australian, and you've spent years
Yes.
there. Was there really a place called the Echoes? Because the book's called The Echoes, and it's a place in the book, as well as being all those echoes of the past crashing through time.
No, it's not a real place. I tend to write places as like an amalgamation of lots of different places. And I think when I'm writing about Australia in particular, I find that easier because there's a nostalgia there, and there's like the long lens of like childhood dreaming and that sort of thing. So I find that much easier to do with Australia, whereas the London bits are very much that flat on that road in Tulse Hill,
We talked about mothers, and the mother relationship is crucial to this book. There's another kind of relationship, though, that somewhat mitigates the misery, which is siblings. Hannah has a big sister called Rachel, and their relationship is what sustains them, it's what keeps them going. In fact, Rachel not being available to her is perhaps what drives her to England in the end.
Yeah.
And also her mother's brother is Tony, and that relationship is crucial. So we need to talk. You need to talk a little bit about siblings
Siblings.
and how they work in this book.
So, I think Hannah and Rachel actually have a really nice childhood. They have a good time.
And they're a gang.
They're a team, and they've got
They compare
space.
their breasts when they're developing. And,
Yeah.
and Hannah's disappointed because Rachel's spring out, and
Yeah.
Hannah's nothing much happens
Yeah.
for much too long.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting thing with sisters. I don't have a sister myself, but I can see it in my friends that once there are two girls, they are immediately in some weird competition. There's the pretty one, and there's the clever one, and there's the one with the boobs, and there's the one without the boobs, and there's all of that sort of stuff. And I think that's fascinating. I don't think that happens with boys. I don't think there might be a like, oh, he's the brighter one, but that's kind of where it stops. Or I feel like
I think boys are competitive on other things. They're competitive on things they do rather than things they are. More.
Yeah. But so I was interested in, what that means if you, from a very young age, are told you are this sibling. How do you break free of that? And that is, one of the things that Hannah's trying to do in moving to the UK is like be a whole new person, and a person not watched by anyone she knows, so that she, in theory, would have the ability to change.
And there are big events in Australia that prompt that.
Yes.
That as it were, shatter the. It's not an idyll in the
No,
Echoes, but
it's not.
it was a happy. The happy childhood is shattered.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things.
Yeah.
The reasons that she's leaving. As you can imagine, Kerry and Tony. so Hannah's mum and uncle. I almost think it's the most important relationship in the book, even though a lot of it is off stage. And without the spoilers, tell me about that relationship.
So it's a relationship. I would say that's the most sort of traumatic. That's a relationship that comes out of the most trauma, I suppose. It's, again, siblings, a boy and a girl who grow up with a mother who has addiction problems and doesn't treat them well, and at various points sends Kerry out for sex work. And again, not that uncommon a situation.
Shocking, but not uncommon.
But yeah.
And actually, those passages are beautifully shocking because there's a matter-of-factness about them. And Kerry thinks, I don't want to make a fuss about this because he'll put his hand over my mouth. I'll just let him do
exactly.
it. And that's heartbreaking, but very, very compelling.
Thank you. So they have this kind of, I guess, trauma bond. They left together, they escaped together, and now they live together. And they've tried living apart, but Tony can't really manage
broken.
it.
He is broken by his experience.
Yeah. And what I wanted with Tony was to have a really charismatic character who the reader is kind of gunning for, and is a completely broken mess. But he's funny, he's quite smart, he's trying...
But he's out of control. He's always getting into fights or insulting people when he really should.
He's got anger that comes out when it shouldn't. At like a travel agent's party.
Yes, his girlfriend's boss. Yes, I know.
Yeah. So but he is trying. I think he's trying to be his version of good, and what slips past him is his love for his nieces. Nearly a crash, and I think I wanted that, trying not to give too much away. I wanted you to miss him and to feel upset that he had behaved in the way he behaved. I think it's interesting if you look at, the Me Too movement and the reactions of people discovering that people they loved had done very bad things, and it's so complicated because the love that you have for them doesn't go magically because they are revealed to be terrible people, and so what do you do with that? And I think that is something I'm really interested in exploring. We don't just pull down the shutters and go, well, I don't love them anymore because they've been awful. That love is still there, it has to go somewhere.
And in this case, into your book, which was a wonderful read.
Thank you.
And although we've gone through quite a lot of territory, very compact, beautifully concentrated in the scenes and the passages. So I'm going to recommend it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So that's Evie, Wyld, The Echoes, which is published by Jonathan Cape at £18.99. If you enjoyed this interview, please subscribe now on your favourite podcast player to be notified of upcoming episodes. Evie, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
That was the Books Podcast, presented by Tim Haig. Email Tim on tim@bookspodcast.com, Twitter @bookspodcast, and Facebook @bookspodcasttim.